Welcome back to Faction Entertainment. Today, we will talk about an animation comedy movie from 2020 titled SpongeBob on the Run. Spoilers ahead. Watch out and enjoy. The movie starts with an opening shot of Bikini Bottom, which takes us to SpongeBob's pineapple, where we find Gary waking our titular character, leaving Snail trail on his face. After this, SpongeBob rushes to yell good morning to Patrick. Then you see SpongeBob eating Gary, which leads to an unrealistic montage showing SpongeBob and Gary's daily routine. Once the montage finishes, SpongeBob rushes to the Krusty Krab in order to be early. Leaving Gary sad and alone in the Krusty Krab, SpongeBob unintentionally annoys Squidward with his shenanigans when Mr. Krabs walks out of office, commanding SpongeBob to raise the colors, hoist the mainsail, and to deploy smokestacks. Meanwhile, at the Chum Bucket, we see Plankton flooding yet another evil plan to get the secret formula until Karen stopped the evil copod, reminding him of his wall of failures, which is a huge wall filled with pictures of Plankton's failures. Karen then convinces Plankton that SpongeBob is the factor of all his failures. Plankton, of course, ignores her and continues his plan. Meanwhile, in the Krusty Krab, SpongeBob is busy cooking and serving Krabby Patties when Sandy arrives with a special invention, a robot named Otto. So she shows the robots and Mr. Krabs, and the crustacean falls in love with it when he realizes it's free and has no emotions. He thinks it's a great invention to fire people without remorse. So after some humorous antics, Mr. Krabs throws Otto to Plankton garbage can. So then Karen decides to adopt Otto. A bubble wife takes us to the Krusty Krab at night, where Mr. Krabs tells SpongeBob to clean up the place. One cleaning montage later, SpongeBob is ready to go home when suddenly the camera zooms into a jar of pickled, revealing Plankton disguised as a pickle is ready to steal a Krabby Patty. So he uses a giant mechanical cloth to remove a food cover from a Krabby Patty. So once he about to accomplish this, SpongeBob enters the kitchen looking for keys, causing Plankton to fall on a puddle. A series of comical mishaps leads us to landing on the fryer when he suddenly realizes that SpongeBob truly is the factor for all his failures. We then are taken to the last city of Atlantic City, where we meet Poseidon, who discovers the existence of a wrinkle right next to his eyes, so he demands Chancellor to bring him a snail. He uses the snail's trail as a face cream when suddenly he discovers that the snail's trail has ran out. So he orders another snail to be brought to him immediately. Then the Chancellor tells Poseidon that they ran out of snails, leading to the Chancellor writing the royal decree and posting it all over town. When Plankton reads one, he gets the brilliant idea of kidnapping Gary and sending SpongeBob on a risky mission to get Gary from the lost city of Atlantic City, thereby getting rid of SpongeBob forever. Next morning, SpongeBob arrives home, where he can't seem to find Gary anywhere, leading to a flashback to Camp Coral, where SpongeBob met Gary. Patrick then tells SpongeBob that he found one of his last snail posters when he gets the idea of looking for clues. His plan eventually works as they both find the royal decree mentioned earlier. So SpongeBob, as soon as Gary's been snail napped and taken to the last city of Atlantic City after a comedic pep talk, SpongeBob and Patrick are ready to go rescue Gary, but they'll need some wheels first. Luckily, Plankton is part of his plan. Provide SpongeBob and Patrick a free ride to the last city of Atlantic City with Otto as the driver, so our heroes embark on a very dangerous mission to go rescue Gary. Meanwhile, Mr. Krabs and Squidward find out SpongeBob is missing and can't cook for the customers, leading to them acting like savages. While that is going on, SpongeBob and Patrick seem to be on a dream where they find a bar called the Inferno Saloon in the middle of nowhere when suddenly a taking tumble. We give the duo a so-called challenge point that's supposed to give SpongeBob the courage needed on his journey. The two are assigned with a task before they can actually look for Gary. The task is to free the souls from the Inferno Saloon. So after a musical number, a human known as El Diablo enters the bar, capturing SpongeBob and Patrick in a cage. Once they get out of the cage, El Diablo tries to kill them with a knife until the duel opened the curtains, letting the sunlight evaporate El Diablo, thereby freeing the souls from the Inferno Saloon like Sage told them to. However, El Diablo comes back as a smoke monster and tries to kill SpongeBob and Patrick once again, but it's quickly defeated. Soon after, they both wake up from the dream, but somehow Sage is still in the picture and tells them to look at the window of Meanwhile, a magical device which allows them to watch what's happening in the kingdom, where they find Poseidon using Gary as a face cream. Horrified by this, SpongeBob and Patrick hurry to the last city of Atlantic City of Bubble. Transition takes us to an Empty Krusty Krab, where we see an upset Mr. Krabs devastated for losing each and every customer he once had not too long ago, when suddenly Plankton enters the Krusty Krab and demands Mr. Krabs to give him that secret formula once and for all. Mr. Krabs without hesitation takes out a tiny secret formula from his belt and hands it to Plankton, who at first happily receives it, feels empty and upset at seeing Mr. Krabs so depressed. Meanwhile, the duo finally arrive to the last city of Atlantic City, where Sage advises them to not lose any focus when at first to do or ignore him. They quickly do in fact lose focus, leading to a montage of SpongeBob and Patrick riding roller coasters, eating food and gambling. It all leads to them waking up drunk and confused. When they finally regained consciousness, they hurried to the Kingdom stage entrance, where they find themselves forced to participate on the talent show. Then SpongeBob finds Gary and tries to get him home, but decided won't let that, so he gets FunBob arrested. And fade out takes us to Sandy sledding does FunBob's pineapple, where she finds out he's missing, so she goes to the Krusty Krab and starts blaming Mr. Krabs and Squidward on SpongeBob's disappearance. When they finally explain that they weren't guilty of Bikini Bottom, news report explaining SpongeBob and Patrick's arrest plays on the Krusty Krab television, so Mr. Krabs, Squidward, Sandy and Plankton embark on another dangerous journey to free SpongeBob and Patrick. We then find SpongeBob and Patrick beside his dungeon. When SpongeBob finds out he lost his challenge coin by gambling it, to duo get on a fight and are then sent to their frightening execution, only to be sabotaged by Mr. Krabs, Squidward, Sandy and Plankton. They then start explaining why SpongeBob shouldn't get executed by traveling back to Camp Coral in the form of flashbacks. Sandy's flashback, we see a young SpongeBob arrive to camp for when he suddenly meets a young Sandy. She then explains why she has to wear her famous astronaut suit, and SpongeBob asks if she's a scientist, with Sandy replying, "No." He then tells her that she could do anything. Sandy is then quickly convinced by SpongeBob that she can indeed be excited just if she wanted to. Ending the flashback, Patrick's flashback, we see a young Patrick crying on top of a log. Then SpongeBob finds him crying and asks him what's wrong. Patrick explains he's homesick and has no friends, so SpongeBob decides to befriend the little sea star and invites him to jelly pitch with him. Squidward flashback, Squidward explains that back then he wanted to win the annual Camp Coral talent show more than anything, and when SpongeBob and Patrick's act steals the crowd, Squidward runs crying to his cabin. Then SpongeBob and Patrick enter his cabin and explain that there was an evaluating mistake and Squidward actually won the Campy Award by landslide. After these flashbacks, Mr. Krabs gives out a speech about how SpongeBob inspired him to open the Krusty Krab and how SpongeBob is in fact the secret formula to the Krabby Patty. After that, the crew performed Secret to the Formula, which is a distraction for SpongeBob to get his hands on Gary and replace it with a wooden imitation, so once beside him discovered this, he sent his guards together. After an exciting chasing, the gang hide in a knight armor, leading to an intense climax with the guards fighting the knight armor being controlled by SpongeBob, Patrick, Squidward, Mr. Krabs, Sandy and Plankton. They all get rounded up by Poseidon, so the Greek god proposes to let them go only if they hand over Gary, when at first SpongeBob is destroyed by this proposal. Sage appears and remembers the yellow sponge that the courage he needs to confront the sight of is inside him. So he divides beside him and tells him that he loved Gary too much to hand him over, so Poseidon is ready to attack when he is stopped by SpongeBob when he tells him he doesn't have any loyal friends. Poseidon laughs as a first, but after actual checking with everyone on his kingdom, he comes to the sad conclusion that he doesn't have any friends. Upset at this, Poseidon cries, but SpongeBob tells him that he'll gladly be his friend if he doesn't kidnap Gary. Poseidon and explains that if he doesn't keep the snail, then he wouldn't be able to get rid of his wrinkle, but SpongeBob explains that looks don't matter. What matters is what's inside. So after this advice, Poseidon starts loosening up a bit by taking off his way, removing his neck clip and dentures, and taking off his chest plate and girdle. When you realize it's how free he feels like that, he salutes SpongeBob for having the courage to stand up against a powerful king and frees Gary and all the snails who previously kidnapped SpongeBob. Has the idea to turn Bikini Bottom into a sea snail refuge. The movie ends with a dedication to the late creator of SpongeBob SquarePants, Steven Hillenburg. That is all for this video. I hope you liked it. If you did, give it thumbs up. Subscribe to Faction Entertainment and turn on notifications so you can get notified by YouTube when we upload a new video. Thanks for watching.